Hello, everyone. We want to welcome you, if you're tuning in today, to our webinar titled How to Be at Full Strength During a Pandemic. This webinar is co-sponsored by the Wesleyan Publishing House and the Education and Clergy Development Division. And today we'll be talking with our special guest, Denny Howard. Denny is a counselor and author who recently wrote a book that I think many of you, if you're pastors today, are familiar with, called At Full Strength: Navigating the Risks That All Pastors Face. And but today we'll be especially interested in talking with Denny and his findings, his research findings, which form the basis of this book, to help ministry leaders thrive better during this COVID-19 pandemic, especially as it kind of gets protracted. Denny is the Director of Counseling and Coaching for Full Strength Network. He is a licensed counselor and has become very good friends with us here in Education and Clergy Development and the Wesleyan Church. Both, I would say, Denny, both a friend and a colleague together, which is wonderful when that happens. Denny lives in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a couple of hours up the road from where we are, where he has practiced counseling for many years, including counseling many pastors and nonprofit leaders. I believe, Denny, over 6,000 ministry leaders that Denny has counseled over the course of his ministry career, his counseling career. His book is based on his findings of a 12-year longitudinal study called the Crosshairs Research Project, which began in 2001 and included over 660 ministry leaders who had dropped out of their ministry. The purpose of the study then was to discover reasons why certain ministry leaders had dropped out. The book is a fascinating account and of great practical help for pastors to predict when they might be caught in certain low times in ministry that can make them vulnerable to dropping out. And so Denny, I think, will be sharing about that. But just as important, I found Denny's book, and many pastors have as well, to have many practical and preventative strategies for pastors that can help to build resilience and overall well-being to help them minister for a lifetime of healthy, fit, and effective ministry. Denny, welcome to our webinar. It's good to see you again.
Dave, it's good to be with you again. I always enjoy any opportunity to get together with you, Dave. That's sincere. I just enjoy the Wesleyan community. Went to actually a Wesleyan seminary and then a graduate school in psychology. So the Wesleyan community is kind of near and dear to my heart. So let's jump in and talk about the research and how it applies. What's interesting with the pandemic, it's just a great lab to really test out the principles and the observations in this research project. I think what it does is what's true about this whole research project, the pandemic just put a magnifying glass over it so people can, it's more obvious.
Exactly, yes. Well, what we'll do is, the way we're structured, I'll have some questions for Denny, and we'll kind of work through actually different parts of your book. The questions are based on the book, but we're also going to lead into how it applies to this particular time of the COVID-19 crisis that we've been in and that's been stretched out for so long. So Denny, I'd like to start off with a question that comes from the second part of your book. It's based on that anyway, which talks about relational pain for pastors. Yeah. Relational pain is one of the more severe pains that a pastor or a ministry leader can suffer, especially when that pain comes as a result of from a relationship.
Yes.
With whom the pastor had a trusted relationship, or maybe even a trusted friend in the church. So you explain this in your book as part of a toxic triangle. Can you explain what a toxic triangle is? And what we can do to avoid that?
Yeah, let me give a little bit of background on the research that really points to that. Is the whole research was about predictable low times in the life of a ministry person. And it's like a rafting trip where the guide says, now at this point, there's going to be rough rapids and you have to paddle hard left or hard right and that kind of thing. And what we discovered in the longitudinal, which means over a long period of time study, is there's predictable low times in the lives of pastors. To really summarize, is marked by four things: a lack of resiliency, that's like a basketball that's lost its inflation, a lack of satisfaction, what they spent a lot of time and money and effort preparing for, a lack of vitality, which means their batteries are like an old cell phone battery. It's, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, physically, mentally, they get up on a full charge and it's run down by 10 a.m. And then a lack of a clear vision. It's like there's Vaseline on their glasses. And I'm going to share the screen here if I can, in terms of the toxic triangle. And I think this is true of all kinds of crises that pastors are in. And I'm trying to figure out how to share it here. I'm having trouble sharing it here. Let me participate, share screen. Okay, here we go. Everybody should be able to see this now. There's basically the toxic triangle is, how do you know you're part of the problem when you're convinced that you're not? And there's three areas that pastors, especially in ministry people, missionaries, a lot of vocational people helpers, is when you enter the toxic triangle, when you're trying to fix or rescue other people. And here's the challenge. Nobody wants to be fixed. When I am doing a workshop and say, how many of you like to be fixed? Nobody raises their hand. How many of you hate it when somebody else tries to fix you? Every hand in the place goes up. And so, but there is a positive counterpart to this. There's a spirit-led positive counterpart. The second is when we begin to sense that we are the martyr or victim. I'm not a very good victim, but I can be a very good martyr. After all I've done for you, this is what I get, is the common self-talk of the person who's entered that toxic triangle. And then the third is some of us get judgmental. And here's what I wanted to say about the toxic triangle is, during the pandemic, what happened is about 4 months ago, I did real-time surveys on the web with 800 to 1,000 pastors. And what they said is their number one emotion that they could identify was anxiety. 3 weeks ago, their number one emotion that they could identify is frustration and impatience. And this is true of a lot of people. Just the brain can only be anxious so long. And so what happens is the brain says, I'm not going to continue to stay in this heightened state of alertness. And so it moves into depression, or it moves into frustration. Frustration is basically this: I have something I want to accomplish and I can't seem to get my arms and mind around it. And so the frustration and impatience has marked that. But what happens is people move into the toxic triangle and they try to fix other people or circumstances. They feel like they're a martyr or a victim of this whole pandemic as a ministry person, or they get judgmental of other people. It's interesting. This is a counterfeit of what God intended through the power of his Spirit. What happens is the people who really become fixers and rescuers, this is me. They really want at heart to be a trusted advisor. But once we move in the toxic triangle is a place of pride. Outside the triangle is a place of humility. And why the triangle? What happens is the longer we stay in the triangle, the smaller it gets. The options become less and less. But outside the triangle is humility. Those who tend to, if you struggle with feeling like the martyr, like after all I've done for this church, this is what I get, or after I've done for these people, and you begin to feel, this is a person who really, when led by the Spirit, truly wants to be sacrificial. And then those who become judgmental are those who, by the power of the Spirit, are people who want to be discerning, and they have this sense of justice and fairness. And so here's the point I want to make. If you are ministering to other people, whether volunteer or a pastor or a missionary or a nonprofit worker or a healthcare worker or educator, when you try to fix or rescue, when you feel that you're the martyr or victim, or you feel judgmental towards other people, you are part of the problem and not part of the solution. And here's the thing, the book At Full Strength is about, so what do I do after all this? And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point, and Dave, go on to the next question.
Yeah, thanks, Denny. I appreciate that. Sort of still related to this toxic triangle, I was talking to a caregiver, not a pastor, but someone who cares for pastors, and they were talking about how this pandemic has become so protracted and going on that but they still have difficult people in their church, that they have to relate to. And some of these people are still finding ways to kind of badger the pastor or to cause stress to the pastor.
Yeah.
Even though we've got all the social distancing going on, I was just wondering if you have any thoughts or advice to pastors about how to deal with that.
A question I often ask pastors, male or female in my office, is this: do you think that person wakes up in the morning saying, I wonder how I could be a real pain to my pastor today? And my answer to that is no, it just comes natural for them. They just are that way. They're a pain to other people. And it's the way that they deal with their stress. And later, Dave, you and I'll talk about the 4 types of stress that ministry people face. But one thing I think we have to realize during this time, and we'll get into it more when we talk about the 4 types of stress, the stress has moved from real potent stress, which is like a hurricane or a car accident or a diagnosis, to one that's like a dripping faucet on a block of granite. And here's what's happening is pastors are dealing with people who are very frustrated and very impatient. And there's 3 things that the Crosshairs research, when we ask ministry leaders, what do you think everybody wants from a ministry leader? We were able to put it into 3 categories. Even though it's hundreds of things, we're able to summarize it in 3 categories. People want you to value them as a person. Secondly, they want you to value their contribution. And thirdly, they want you to value their feedback. And here's the thing, feedback, even if it's negative, caustic, cynical, impatient, condescending, it's still feedback for the pastor. And so what I'm saying is, if you communicate those 3 things in some way, that I value you, I value your contribution, I value your feedback, what you find is people begin to calm down a little bit, because I think some very good people are very, very, like I said weeks ago, it was anxiety in the survey of the top emotions. Now it's frustration, impatience, and agitation, because it's been a dripping faucet on a block of granite that's wearing a hole through people. People are getting tired of being told what to do. I have to wear a mask. I came out of a store yesterday and I saw a lady go, like this. And she turned around. I said, forgot your mask, didn't you? She goes, she says, I do this all the time. She goes, I'm getting so sick of this. And it's so funny to see people's reactions to walking from their car to a store. They get halfway in or to the door and realize they don't have their mask on. And so people are very frustrated right now. And if I could give any words of advice to a ministry leader, is just understand the person you're dealing with. Gentleness and kindness will go a long ways, because count on it. You can count on it. My guess is they're frustrated and aggravated. And it's just below the surface of their niceness. And so that might help them be able to minister more effectively.
Yeah, thanks, Denny. Yeah, it sounds like pastors need to have a growing sense of self-awareness about being inside that triangle.
Yeah,
where they might be getting outside.
When I try to fix them, or I'm the martyr, I'm this pastor going, wait a minute, I've been really helpful to you in all these years, or they get judgmental of that person,
Mm,
to really be aware of those three things and to
hmm.
say, look, in in my heart of hearts, with the help of God's Spirit, I want to be a shepherd
Yeah.
and trusted advisor. I want to be sacrificial. I want to be discerning, and I want fairness.
Hmm.
Sometimes when you're just aware, here's the thing, even after writing the book, I'm not always aware of when I enter the toxic triangle. I become keenly aware when I'm in it,
Hmm.
and to kind of repent from that and to step outside that toxic triangle and go, that's you know, what kind of person do I want to be, regardless of how that person's treating
Yes.
me.
Yes. Well, thank you for that, Denny. I want to move on to our next question. We're in this obviously very stressful time, and it's, as I said before, kind of getting protracted. And now, it's difficult enough to be a pastor in, normal, quote unquote, normal times. But now we have a layered, I refer to it as layers of other types of stresses that are a little bit more unusual in our time in
Yeah,
history.
yeah.
And now another one's coming up with this controversial election season. There's all these, the pandemic and the racial issues and so on,
Yep,
that we're all very
yep.
familiar with. So, keeping that in mind for pastors and other ministry leaders, what would you encourage pastors to be looking out for about certain challenges that might affect them spiritually and maybe in other ways during this very unusual time of stress?
I think pastors, I do a workshop based on the book that has to do with um, the types, assessing the type of stress that we're facing as ministry people, how it seeks its own expression, and then so what can you do about it? I'm under this kind of stress. And let me share my screen again. There's four types of stresses that pastors and ministry people, caregivers, basically vocational caregivers. The book is really just as appropriate for nurses or educators or social workers or youth workers as it is for pastors. Because the research was really on vocational caregivers. But there's four types of stresses that we face, and there's one that we really need to pay attention to during this pandemic. Um, the first one really was a potent stress, and what potent stress is really about is that it's like a car accident. It's like a diagnosis. It's like your teenage son comes home drunk out of his mind. It hits you hard and it hammers you. For example, if you get a diagnosis of cancer, here's the thing, we tend to deal with potent stress fairly well because people know we're under stress. Pastor has cancer, or this parishioner has cancer, and we know they're under stress, and people want to help them and they want to pray for them, they want to encourage them. And the number one way to deal with potent stress is to externalize it. What I mean by that is talk about it or write about it. I'll give you an example. I have a good friend who's a psychologist in Boston. And during the Boston bombing, the marathon bombing, what was that, 2013, 2014, he said there are two pastors that he worked with that actually ran towards the bombing and started helping people. And he says one of them stuffed it and he's no longer in ministry. The other one started talking about it, went to counseling, actually started going on the speaker circuit about the Boston bomber and that experience. He's still in ministry and has a thriving ministry. The person who stuffed it is no longer even in ministry. He said the difference was on that potent stress of that experience. Now, the thing is, they're both heroes because they ran towards the bombing. They didn't know if there's another one going off or not. But the thing is, one is still in ministry and the other is not because he chose to communicate about it. And then the second, here's the one that's the most dangerous in ministry in general, but it's very dangerous right now during COVID in this pandemic, is persistent stress. This could also be called pernicious stress, which means it's kind of like a cancer that slowly eats away at you. It's a dripping uh, a drop of water on a block of granite that over time wears a hole in it. Thus, they've moved from the potent stress of feeling anxiety to the persistent stress of feeling frustration, irritation, agitation, and impatience. And so this is the most difficult to deal with, and what we'll talk about later, and the book deals the most with. And then there's perceptual stress. There's a lot of pastors who are saying we have to keep things going like they've always gone. But here's the thing. There's a real hurry up and wait in our culture. You work harder to accomplish less. They have a high, this is the kind of where it's like a high jumper. You set the bar, you have to jump over it, but every time you go to jump, it raises a quarter inch. And so pastors, I will say to pastors, if you treated me like you treat yourself, would I like you? And they usually say, no. I'm going, well, so why, where's the grace and mercy, God's grace? Where's the sustaining grace? Where's receiving God's grace? Why don't you allow yourself to experience that grace instead of just being a minister, administrating that grace to others? And then the last one is pervasive. Basically, pervasive is this. It's a combination of two or more of the others. And so we'll probably talk more here about the persistent stress, because that's what's really affecting pastors more right now. And so at this point, I'll stop sharing my screen. We can keep talking here.
Yeah, thanks, Denny. Those practical illustrations are so helpful. It really helps me at least, to understand and put a handle on these things. I'm sure many pastors appreciate that as well. Yes, another question that I wanted to ask you is that relates to pastors trying to manage their emotional life and their emotional feelings during this time. And again, I think we all did, this real spike in emotional stress with pastors at the beginning of this pandemic.
Oh, absolutely.
Everybody was scrambling to try to figure out how to put church online and how to provide pastoral care. And then we sort of settled in. I mean, it's not that maybe there was still this pervasive stress or persistent stress with it, but they at least had figured things out. But now that it's getting kind of stretched out longer, we're finding many pastors are feeling a kind of a reemergence of this. Maybe they're thinking more about how long is this going to be, and there's another rise in this these strong emotional feelings and stresses that they're feeling about an uncertain future, maybe. So I was wondering what you might suggest to pastors as they to help them to manage their own emotional challenges.
Yeah, I would suggest don't quit. I've probably working with pastors, my heart goes out to them. I don't think I'd want to be a pastor right now. And so I really commend those men and women who pastor and continue to lean into it. And I would say this, when you want to quit, wait 120 days. When they come to me as a coach and a counselor, and after 6,000 of them, would you wait 90 to 120 days? Do not quit what seems to be your call and mission because you feel very emotionally distraught right now. Here's the thing, there are tens of thousands of pastors in America who feel distraught right now. They're frustrated, they're depleted. And so in a few minutes, based on the book, it's interesting. I wrote the book and it was published in January of 2019. It was released, but it would probably have been more appropriate to release it in March of 2020. Because I really think the principles on dealing with persistent, pernicious, dripping faucet stress, the book is full of strategies and procedures and ways of thinking and ways of dealing with your emotions. There's an online workbook that deals with it. I don't want to be an infomercial about the book, but I think it's very important for pastors to stay in the fray, lean in there, and don't make a quick decision, because I've probably quit about 10 times in the last couple of months, just dealing with pastors going, what am I going to do with these pastors? It's a very real challenge. It's not in their mind. It's out there, and it's affecting everybody. And if there's anybody that we need these days, it's the pastors to have vitality. And we can talk in a few minutes about what that vitality looks like for pastors who are in. I would say to pastors right now, do not judge your ministry. Never judge a man or woman by their lowest point. Do not judge your ministry by the COVID era. Judge your ministry over the long haul. If you want to assess your ministry, don't assess it under COVID. Nobody's been in COVID before. None of us who are living today, unless you're 103 years old, know what it's like to live through a pandemic.
True. Very true.
And all these experts out there, the truth is, they're all just doing the best they can to give the best advice they can. But the truth is, I felt this pressure to try to help pastors at the beginning of the pandemic, thinking, what on earth do any of us know? Nobody's an expert on a pandemic, including the infectious disease doctors, because none of us who are living today have been through a pandemic. And so we're in this together. Let's figure it out. Stay a pastor for at least 90 more days and get some help. Get some help outside of you, a coach, a counselor, a friend, an older pastor friend, but get some help. Don't go it alone. That would be my main advice to pastors, because people feel lonely, and it's because even myself, I'm in 2 accountability groups that I have a part of. I meet with several men weekly. And here's what disappeared during the pandemic: those two-way reciprocal transformational relationships. Why? Because they always happened over a cup of coffee in a coffee place or restaurant. And when we couldn't have that, we're saying, it'll be 3 or 4 weeks. We'll get back to it. Next thing you know, it's months and we're not back to it.
Yes. Well, that leads sort of to our last question that we want to focus on today. Again, I mentioned earlier that one of the strengths of your book, Denny, is that you don't just kind of offer predictions as to what pastors can face and when in the ministry they might face them. It's amazing. But also strategies for the preventative side of it, prevent this.
Yeah.
So I thought one of your illustration at this part of the book was really good. You can have strategies, but if you don't have the energy and the vitality engage in those strategies, it's sort of like, okay, you have a car, you're in a really nice, reliable car, and you have a GPS system, but you don't have any fuel, to get the car to where it needs to be.
Or your fuel line is clogged,
exactly. And a lot of us can certainly feel, a lot of us feel that way right now. And,
absolutely.
Can you explain maybe what you mean by a strategic plan? You talk about having a strategic plan for
Well, let me say this to pastors and other ministry people. You may feel like you're in a new car, you had all kinds of aspirations, and you've run low on fuel, or you have a clogged fuel line. And I just want to say you have a good case of the normals. And so I want to give you here's the thing. The book, please read the introduction. It's 5 or 6 pages. It's why the book was written, and it's written for you. And then 2 chapters is about the research. The rest of the 15 chapters is about, so what do I do? And so it's encouraging your pastor saying, well, I read the book, but the truth is I keep pulling it off as a reference guide to, okay, what do I do here? And they're not telling you what to do. It's giving you principles and strategies and procedures to be able to go through. And so I can't say one answer fits all. So it isn't do this. It's not a tell you what to do book as much as here's some principles and strategies to help you navigate the challenges before you. We're assuming you have some God-given wisdom and that you're going to use that God-given wisdom, but sometimes we need the vehicle to be able to apply that wisdom. Yeah. And so let me share the screen again here. We'll move on to some things that I think are really important here. Let me give you a word picture before you really don't look too much at this vitality wheel yet, but picture yourself as a reservoir of water outside of a major city. Like west of Denver is Lake Dillon, and Lake Dillon is the watershed for Denver. On the end is a dam that gives energy to Denver, and it also provides water supplies for Denver. And out of the mountains are smaller reservoirs that fill Lake Dillon. And Lake Dillon is to be full, not to be selfish. You need to be a full reservoir, not to be selfish, but to provide energy for others, and to provide, water for others, which is vitality for others, spiritual vitality. And people recreate on Lake Dillon. You can't have any petroleum-based boats, but you can have electric boats and sailboats and that kind of thing. And so you provide all kinds of things, spiritually, emotionally, relationally, physically, maritally, family-wise for people as a ministry person. So here's the question I'd have to ask you. Where is your reservoir? Is it almost full? Is it half? Or are you looking at the sludge in the bottom? And here's what happens when you're looking at the sludge in the bottom. It's easy to fall prey to counterfeits, too much TV, pornography, too much eating, too much exercise. The thing is, some of those things aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves, but they become evil and dishonoring to God because they become idols to us. And so here's the question I'd have to ask everybody that's listening. What rituals or activities has God given you that brings you vitality, that refills your reservoir so you could be a blessing to the Lord and a blessing to others? And these 8 areas, this is very Western thinking. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense in Christians in China. So what I'm saying is don't divide this up too much, but what renews you mentally, emotionally, physically, recreationally, maritally, family-wise? What are the rituals and activities? When you could find some that actually cross the categories, I'll give you an example. You need to do this. Remember, we're under persistent stress, the dripping faucet on the block of granite. And we need to have vitality strategies that are like a dripping faucet on a block of granite to eat away the stress. And I'll give you an example, one in my life. I like bicycling. So I'll take my devotional book, I'll take my Bible on an electronic device. I'll take some reading, and I'll bicycle to a bike shop or to a coffee shop. And I'll do all that stuff, and I'll later meet a friend there. So it's actually mental. I'm reading a book. It's emotional because biking, nobody can tell me their problems when I'm on a bike. It's physical exercise. It's recreational to me. And it could be spiritual because I take my devotional book, but I also can include a friend or a family member or my wife. And so, but the thing is, it doesn't cross the seasons. What I do in the winter, I actually invest in winter biking gear. So if the roads aren't icy and snowy, I still do it. People think I'm a crazy old man, but I don't care, because the truth is, my wife says you need to invest in this because you are a better husband, a better man of God, a better counselor, a better father, a better grandfather when you bicycle. And so what are the activities that God has given you? I can't say go bicycle, because some people hate that. Some people hate going for walks. Some people hate reading, but maybe it's playing the guitar or piano, or it's reading, or it's getting together with a friend or whatever. But the more categories it crosses, you may only need 2 or 3 activities that you do routinely that keeps your reservoir is to go down, because it's called being ministering. It will go down. It's inevitable to go down. What are you doing? What are you accessing that God has given you that keeps it moving like this, instead of going all the way down to the sludge in the bottom?
Yeah, it's about doing things that you want to do, and not things that you have to do.
Yeah.
That's good, Denny. I so appreciate that. Really appreciate you joining us today, Denny. Your book is great. Really have enjoyed reading it and recommending it to others. And I know there's so many other practical, and again, I think it's one of the great strengths of the books is the practical helps that it can give to pastors everywhere.
Can I give a real quick 3 resources here that might help them?
Sure, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, by all means.
One that goes with the book that in later editions will be added is How Are You Doing Really? mylifedomains.org is a way to assess how am I doing emotionally, spiritually, relationally, mentally, physically. You could do it over and over and compare yourself to a month or 2 or 3 months ago. And then fullstrength.org, a Full Strength Network, is specifically for pastors, and it's loaded with strength-based resources for pastors. And pastorwell.org, you may want to check that out because there's 9 different activities, resources, services that you can, if you join pastorwell.org, which is very inexpensive. It basically is a scholarship program to help pastors. But those are 3 that I would look at there. Maybe watch the video later, but write those down. Those are 3 resources. And even within Full Strength Network, there's a thing called ministrypulse.org, which is a daily way to journal in about 3 minutes for people who hate to journal. And I've learned a lot about myself. We're out of time, but I could share some experiences that I've actually changed some things that has helped my vitality by using ministrypulse.org.
Thank you, Denny. Yeah, and I just to reinforce what Denny's sharing, in ECD, we're engaging with a number of districts now with Pastor Well and the Pastor Well program and all of these services that they offer for pastors. And so you'll be hearing more about that too in the days ahead. Thank you so much, Denny. And just quick, can you share how people can get a hold of your book or learn more about your book?
They could go to Wesleyan Publishing Houses, Wesleyan Publishing House, Amazon.com, Christian Book Distributors. But if they really want to order it in bulk, they probably need to go to Wesleyan Publishing House to actually. What I find is there's a lot of used books out there if you want to get it for just a few dollars. But if you need to order 5, 6, 7, 8 of them, you probably have to go directly to Wesleyan Publishing House.
Okay, great.
And ask for At Full Strength, Navigating the Risk All Pastors Face.
Great. Thank you, Denny. Thank you so much. And at the end of our broadcast today, we have a book giveaway, and our giveaway winner is Pastor Stuart Marples. And I know Stuart. Had nothing to do with the giveaway. It just happens to be that I know Stuart. He's a great pastor. He's been around for a number of years and out there on the front lines. And I'm so glad that he was our winner today. So Stuart, you'll be receiving a free copy of At Full Strength from the Wesleyan Publishing House, and they'll be in contact to get the information from you in order so that you can get that book. Thank you once again for joining us on this webinar, At Full Strength, Navigating the Risks That All Pastors Face, which is Denny's book. And we want to thank you for joining us about how to be at full strength during a pandemic. Take care and God bless.